Greetings and welcome to the Introduction to Astronomy. In this week's Misconception in Astronomy, we will talk about the North Star Polaris and find out if it is directly overhead. So let's get started here. Is the North Star directly overhead? And the answer is no, with one exception, and that is if you live at the North Pole. So if you're at the North Pole or very close to that, then the Polaris would be roughly overhead. However, Polaris is not overhead for most people on Earth, and in fact for the vast majority. Now, Polaris is the pole star near the North Celestial Pole, and we can see it in the image here. You might note the Big Dipper off to this side, and you can use the two pointer stars in the Big Dipper, which are these two, and if you trace those in a straight line toward north, you will come toward a star, which is Polaris, or the North Star. Now, it's important because it identifies the position of the North Celestial Pole. That's what makes Polaris so important. It's not one of the brightest stars in the sky. It is relatively bright, but about number 50. There are a lot of brighter stars there, but its location near the North Celestial Pole is what is important. So, where is Polaris on the sky? Well, it really depends on your location. So, what we'd see is that your location, we can use that because the altitude of the pole, how high it is above the northern horizon, is equal to the latitude of the observer, how far you are away from the equator. So what this means is that if you are at the North Pole, then Polaris would be directly overhead at the North Celestial Pole. However, that is not always the case. So we can see that here in the image. If you were at the North Pole standing here, then yes, the North Celestial Pole would be straight overhead, and that means you would see Polaris straight overhead. However, in most cases, that is not what happens, and we can see here that it depends on your location. So if we take a look at these examples, we can see that for someone at the pole, yes, the North Celestial Pole is at the zenith or straight overhead. However, if someone is at the equator, then the North Celestial Pole would be on the horizon. It would just barely be visible at the horizon if you had a clear view. And anywhere in between, it would be at some angle, and that angle would be related to the latitude of the observer. So if the North Pole were 40 degrees above the horizon, that meant that you were 40 degrees north of the equator. So it is a way to be able to determine your location. And this was used for navigation long ago, prior to things like GPS and other navigation instruments. You could actually use this to make sure that as you were traveling across the ocean with no landmarks, if you were keeping the North Celestial Pole at a constant altitude every night, then you knew that you were traveling due east or due west and not drifting too far north or south. So what we find with Polaris is, yes, it is at a fixed point on the celestial sphere, but what that point is depends on your position on Earth. So let's go ahead and finish up with our summary. And what we've looked at today is that Polaris is only overhead if you are at the Earth's North Pole. We learned that the altitude of the pole is equal to the latitude of the observer and how this was used for navigation in the past. And we can consider that if you were south of the Earth's equator, then Polaris cannot be seen. So that concludes this week's Misconception in Astronomy on the North Star being directly overhead. We'll be back again next week for another Misconception in Astronomy. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.